Welcome to Inspired Change, a new inspirational and motivational broadcast that strives to empower men in a positive way, designed to educate, empower, and inspire even the busiest individual on the go over that first cup of coffee. Please join me in welcoming Gunter, international psychologist, author, speaker, and producer.
Welcome everybody. Here we are for another episode of Inspired Change. So, I've been talking a lot about character and purpose, and I want to particularly keep my focus on the development of character. And so I touched a little bit on the development of children and how we really are creating the foundation for their character as we bring them up, as we socialise them and help them to become children, teens and adults that are able to have a good sense of themselves and to fit well into society, into the community. So just as a quick refresher, remember when I talked about character in the last episode, I asked the question about, well, what does character really in essence consist of? So I'm just going to refresh your memory. There's three components to it. The first one is good intentions. And fundamentally, that's my vision or purpose towards which I act at all times. The second one is that issue about moral character, which consists of my values, my beliefs, my attitudes, and the internal dialogue that guides me and allows me to be in flow. And flow is something that I'm going to be speaking about in some form or another in the future as well. But right now, let's stick with the whole thing about developing character. Now, the third element is about sound reasoning or relevant experience or expertise. And I've argued that this is fundamentally about critical thinking. But in hindsight, I thought about that a little bit more and I went, it's actually about my capacity to keep educating myself as well. Just because I've got a university degree, it doesn't stop there. My interaction with other people educates me. My observation and interaction with the world around me educates me. But one of the things that I want to stress, because of my work with teenagers, is that the art of reading seems to be disappearing, and unfortunately that's a really, really sad fact. Out of all the teenage boys that I work with, I'd say 2/3 of them don't read. They read what's absolutely necessary for school, but I don't think they really go out of their way to seek out a book and read it cover to cover. It's a great shame. I think they're missing out on a great deal. Now, if we track them down further into adulthood, some of them improve, mainly because they get to university and they need to keep it up there. But that whole thing about education, I think, needs to be stressed. And so how's that relevant? Well, I spend a fair amount of my time reading, and so it's not just in psychology, but it's in history, it's in anthropology, sociology. Every now and then I chuck some fiction into it just for some fun because I like reading it and I like writing it. But one of my favourite philosophers of the 20th century and 21st century, because he's still alive, is a guy called A.C. Grayling. And the observation that he makes in respect to character is that he refers to Socrates, who famously said that the unconsidered life is not worth living. And what A.C. Grayling goes on to say is that Socrates meant that a life lived without forethought or principle is a life so vulnerable to chance and so dependent on the choices and actions of others that it is of little real value to the person living it. He further meant that a life well lived is one that has goals and integrity, which is chosen and directed by the one who lives it to the fullest extent possible to a human agent caught in the webs of society and history. He's a beautiful wordsmith, but the ideas expressed in this are fundamentally important. And if there's one singular guiding light in making good men great, then A.C. Grayling's elucidation of Socrates' quote, then this is it, full stop. Now, with that in mind, let me suggest that men approach all aspects in our life from this perspective with all the inherent values embedded in it. Now, for this episode, I want to start with this and apply it to the realm of being a great dad. And for you, the listener out there, to reflect on this deeply. I do a lot of work with boys, and there are very many times when a lot of the boys' issues have arisen from their relationship with their father or the lack of the relationship with their father. Now, let me put a bit of a disclaimer in this. Fundamentally, I believe that we as men are getting better in our desire to be engaged with our partner and children, especially with in the family context, and since COVID-19, that's highlighted a lot of stuff. So one of the things that I want to do to get the ball rolling is that I think the best place to begin with is where Professor Grayling says, a life well lived is one which has goals and integrity, which is chosen and directed by the one who lives it to the fullest extent possible. Some of us don't live, we exist. We survive rather than thrive. So let me come back, Character is about good intention, which is one of the things that I want to impart on my children so that they can develop, as they mature, a vision and a purpose towards they'll act. And I want them to have a moral character. I want them to behave appropriately in the society that they live in. Neurological research about what's important in child development is emotional regulation and conduct. Cognitive development comes third. It's not the primary aspect of this. However, we want to develop that too because it helps to enrich our life. So the first question I want to throw out there for you guys as dads is, what are your goals? At least the ones that you've chosen so far, not the ones that have thrust on you. And so the second question is, how do you maintain integrity with all the myriad of opinions, experts and media bombarding us with how-tos and conflicting supposed facts? I mean, one of the things that's come out of this whole thing with COVID, and probably it's been brewing for the last decade or so, is this stuff about fake news and conspiracy theories. And, again, how do we sort this through? Now, my argument, it comes down to the third element in character, which is about sound reasoning. Now, in order to do that, you need to inform yourself a little bit better than just watching Sky News or Fox, which is essentially a form of dumbing down the population to swallow whatever pathetic ideologies is presented to us from some think tank or politician with, a hidden agenda, and not so hidden at times. So let me put that aside. So let's talk about being intentionally inclusive. Why am I talking about intentionally inclusive? Because as a great dad, I want to be a participant in the rearing of my son or daughter. Now, again, as I said, there's a change here, but traditionally most of us came into being a dad more as a bystander or a companion for the real parent, the mother. Hold on, you might say. That's a bit harsh. However, let me explain this a bit further. By simple biological fact, we men do not carry the child, which is an extensively intimate experience for a human being. But it's the mother that does that. So her relationship with the child starts immediately from that point where her pregnancy is confirmed. So her experience is deeply imbued with all the impending joys and risks that come with being pregnant, being vulnerable, but yet at the same time strong. I've watched women do some extraordinary things whilst they were pregnant. Stuff of physical strength and emotional stamina. Now, I believe that we men need to reach deep into ourselves to even approximate being pregnant and to anticipate the birth of our child. It's not something that, we can necessarily feel. We can cognitively empathise with that, but we need to stick with it. So I'm not saying that men aren't affected by the experience of pregnancy and childbirth. Some are so profoundly affected that they pass out in the delivery room, something that must have been anticipated by the midwives of old when they kept men out of the room. Now, that's a conjecture. I'm not sure whether that's necessarily true. So, back to my point. With many of the men that I've worked with, one of the most frequent observations I get from them is that they often feel excluded or sidelined, like the fifth wheel on a car, pulled out in an emergency. Honey, you deal with your son as being an absolute pain. Okay, so we weren't necessarily there to see what the kid did in the first place, so we step in on behalf of our partner who's now completely frustrated and thrown in the towel and raised the white flag, and I'm the one who's going to deal with the kid and supposedly discipline them. Okay, that works to a degree. But does it really include dad and the child into an intimate relationship with each other? Chances are not so much. Now, I'm not saying don't discipline the kid, but I'm saying we need to look at how that is done in the context in which it happens. Now, at times, there are some mothers who blame their partner, and other times they work, but it's more often something that they see it's society's fault. So if the child's not performing at school, that's because there's bad teachers, or the teachers aren't doing the right thing, or he's just in a bad crowd. So we give excuses and explanations for the child's bad behaviour that I somehow as the dad are meant to sort of solve. Yet, amidst all of this, it's the dad's responsibility in how you approach your experience of firstly becoming a father and then being a father. There's no escape. Once you got that kid, there's no escaping the fact that you have become a father and you're going to continue to be a father. And to you and your partner, you're accountable. So, in the sort of manifesto of making good men great, for want of a better word, I talk about inclusivity. So how does that apply for the experience of becoming a father, you might ask? Well, because firstly, being a father is not an outcome. It's an ongoing process of growth, an evolutionary journey. It's also an proposition of including people, values, rules and experiences in a way that makes logical sense in the long term. Letting the kid off the hook in the short term is not going to do him much good in the long term. So those of you who are thinking that you don't need to read on or listen further in educating yourself about being a dad, and that ship sailed and you're all past it, think again. Your journey as a father is going to continue. Mine is, and I'm a grandfather now, and it still continues. And there's a feeling and a passion that's different to being a dad to being a grandfather. And I'll get into that in another episode. So, what sort of dad do you want to be? Now remember, what is your intention in all of this? What's your moral compass? How are you educating yourself? The problem is, how are you going to deal with all the trials and tribulations that are going to come with being a dad? You need to have like a tradesman or an engineer, some tools in the kit, but you've also got to develop your character. You know, what is it that's going to really make you be that dad that your kid wants to come to and, you know, sit on your lap or put his arms around you and go, Dad, I've got an issue, or Dad, why don't we go fishing or go for a surf? Now, it is not all about doing things together. Being a great dad is the sort of non-verbal modelling that you do. So, for example, how do you deal with your own negative emotions, your own challenges, your own struggles? Do you share that? Do you keep it to yourself? Do you just get grumpy and snap at people just because they disagree with you or they're not doing what they're told? So part of that process is also then to include your partner. In essence, in corporate terms, you guys are the executive team and you better get on the same page, because it will get, without a shadow of a doubt, very, very bumpy if you're not. And I can give you case after case where the problem in a teenager's life and mental state is the fact that there is little consistency. There is little emotional regulation. And we need to overcome that. We're the adults. We need to get on top of it. All right. So let me finish here for today. And in the next podcast, I'm going to carry on with a little bit more in depth about this topic. So in the meantime, I'm going to invite you to reflect some more on your character, on being a dad. Till next time.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change with Gunter. Gunter Swoboda does individual and group coaching for men looking to grow. For more information on this and the global Making Good Men Great movement, check out goodmengreat.com to get into contact. If you have a topic for the show or would like to be a guest on the air, please email producers at miranda@noirtainment.com. That's Miranda, Miranda, at Noirtainment, NOIRTAINMENT.com. Thank you, and always keep inspiring change.